Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into a case, a really tough case, actually, that shook America over a century ago.
Mm,
It's the murder of Mary Phagan.
yeah.
And, thankfully, you guys have sent in some really amazing sources on
It's
this.
incredible forces.
And so, together, we're going to try to explore, kind of piece together who Mary was,
Right.
the circumstances surrounding her death,
Absolutely.
and then kind of the ripple effects of that case, because
Yeah.
they still impact us today in ways that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Absolutely. I mean, this isn't just, some historical footnote. This
Yeah.
is, a story with, echoes, right?
Yeah.
Echoes that we still hear today
Yeah.
in a lot of different ways. And it really kind of brings up this sort of, systemic issues with prejudice and justice in America
Yeah.
and how those things are all interconnected.
So let's start with Mary. From the sources you sent, it kind of paints this picture of Atlanta in 1913. And, we think about that time. There were no safety regulations,
Yeah.
no minimum wage.
No, absolutely not.
And families, they did what they had to
You
do
did.
to survive.
Whatever it took.
And for a lot of families, that meant children working.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Mary, just 13 years old, was one of those children.
Yeah.
And she was working at the National Pencil Company, earning a whopping $1.20 for her week's labor.
Wow. I mean, it's just such a stark contrast, right, to the world we live in now. But back then, I mean, this was the norm, right,
Right.
for so many working class families.
Yeah.
And just imagine the pressure on a young girl like Mary, right,
Right.
to contribute to her family's income,
Yeah.
with very limited options.
Yeah.
And it's like her future is seemingly predetermined
Right.
by her circumstance.
It's honestly really difficult to even wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
And then on April 26, 1913, a Saturday,
Mm.
seemingly normal Saturday,
Right.
Mary goes to collect her pay
Yeah.
for $1.20.
Hmm.
And she never returns home. I mean, just think about what that must have been like for her family.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just agonizing, right? The
Yeah.
hours turning into a nightmare.
And then the next day, her body is discovered in the factory basement
Right?
by the night watchman.
Yeah.
And the details are brutal. I mean, there were signs of a struggle. Her dress was torn,
Mm.
and evidence pointing towards just a horrific, crime.
Yeah.
And immediately suspicion falls on those who society already kind of deemed as outsiders.
Right.
Just it's a tragic pattern we see repeated throughout history.
Yeah. Over and over and over again.
Yeah. And that's where Leo Frank comes in. He's the factory superintendent,
Okay.
a Jewish man originally from New York.
Mm.
And, from the sources you shared, it seems like his religion really played a significant role in him becoming a suspect.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little? Like, what was the climate of anti-Semitism like in Atlanta at the time?
Yeah. I mean, anti-Semitism was unfortunately pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
There were these really deep-seated prejudices and stereotypes that were just pervasive throughout society about Jewish people. And it was really fueled by, economic anxieties and social tensions.
Yes.
And so, Frank, as an outsider, I mean, he's an outsider, geographically.
Yeah.
He's from New York.
Right.
He's also an outsider, religiously.
Right.
And so he becomes very quickly, kind of the scapegoat in this really charged atmosphere.
And that kind of leads us into the trial, which, from what I'm reading in these sources,
Yeah.
it was anything but fair.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, you're absolutely right. The evidence against Frank was largely circumstantial. I mean, it really relied heavily on, some pretty questionable testimonies and really a lack of any strong physical evidence tying him to the crime.
Right.
One of the things that really kind of stands out is, this alleged note that was found near Mary's body.
Right.
And it was presented as if she had written it.
Right.
But handwriting analysis back then it was in its infancy.
Right.
And experts today believe that the note was most likely forged.
Oh, wow.
And this is just, one example, right, of the many really questionable tactics that were used to try to secure a conviction.
So yet, despite appeals and clear doubts about the evidence, the verdict stood.
Yeah. I mean, the atmosphere surrounding this whole trial was just incredibly charged.
Mm-hmm.
Public opinion, which was fueled by prejudice and, just a thirst, right, for someone to blame for this horrific act, created just this immense pressure for a conviction, regardless of the evidence.
Right.
And so that's kind of the sad reality of the situation.
Yeah. And then, we have this twist where Governor John Slayton, he reviews the case, and he's clearly having doubts about Frank's guilt.
Hmm.
And so he commutes his sentence to life in prison.
Right.
You would think that that would be a step toward justice, but
But it really backfired. I mean,
yeah.
his act of clemency, instead of calming the situation, was seen by many as proof of this conspiracy to protect Frank.
Right.
And it really just enraged those who were already convinced of his guilt.
Wow.
And it fueled the flames of anti-Semitism even further.
And that leads to the horrific event that follows, which is just, it's hard to even talk about, but a mob kidnaps Frank from prison, takes him to Mary Phagan's hometown, and they lynch him.
Yeah. I mean, this lynching was just this terrifying display of mob violence that was completely fueled by prejudice. And it underscores the fragility of justice.
Right.
When fear and bigotry hold sway, I mean, this is a man who was completely denied due process, was robbed of his life based on, assumptions and hatred.
It's a chilling reminder of how easily fear can just override reason.
Absolutely.
And the repercussions of this case, they continue long after Frank's death.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this case became really a pivotal moment in the fight against anti-Semitism in this country. And, for example, it led to the formation of the Anti-Defamation League,
Right.
which is dedicated to combating bigotry and protecting civil rights. But sadly, it also, contributed to the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan.
Wow.
And it really just demonstrates the deep-seated prejudices that still group the nation.
Yeah. I mean, even the pardon that Frank received in 1986, while it acknowledged, the miscarriage of justice,
Right.
it couldn't erase the stain of this whole tragedy.
No, I mean, and I think that's something that's really important, for us to remember as we kind of, do this deep dive into the Mary Phagan case, is that it forces us to confront, some really difficult truths about our past and to acknowledge the enduring legacy of prejudice. And it really begs us to ask ourselves, what can we learn from this, to ensure a more just future? How do we recognize and challenge our own biases?
Right.
How do we protect the vulnerable and make sure that justice prevails over fear?
It's a powerful call to action for all of us. This case is a reminder that we must always remain vigilant against prejudice and bigotry.
Absolutely.
And that the pursuit of justice, it requires a commitment to truth and fairness, no matter how difficult the circumstances might be.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening.
Yes.
We'll be back next week with another deep dive.